Hi there, my name is Lucas Twinell, and this is my recording for my final project for marketing. So for my project, I chose to interview a former boss of mine, Miss Caluette, Permanent Coatings Incorporated out of Denham Springs, Louisiana. I worked for PCI for a couple years when I first moved to Louisiana, before I went on to do other things. Worked for Miss Caluette. She was both the general manager and the sales manager. I mostly interacted with her in her general manager role. I worked production, but I did get to see her work as a sales manager, and I was able to reach out to her and interview her for this project to kind of see what her thoughts are about the sales field in general and how she manages her team. So I learned quite a few things from her. One of the main things was Miss Caluette runs a very small team for sales. So PCI employs, on average, about 7 to 9 full-time staff. It's a very small firm, especially for its industry, which is coatings. So the sales team itself is only about 2, sometimes 3 people, not including Miss Caluette, who manages them. One of the best practices that I saw was her insistence on communication between the teams. So because the teams are so small, they tend to be more widespread. Her salespeople work from home, some will live in Mississippi, some near Texas, and this helps cover the sales area that they're able to, find clients in, and gives them kind of leverage against the bigger firms. So communication is definitely key. She's constantly in contact with her salespeople. She told me she felt like she needed to be, because there's been some incidents where they haven't reached out to her when they were supposed to, and a customer was expecting one thing, got another, and so because she is the sales manager, it ultimately fell on her to reach out to her salespeople, and not necessarily the other way around, even though it is their responsibility as well. So something I learned from this, aside from the fact that communication is key, is that smaller teams can also be effective. The way PCI and Ms. Caluette tends to handle their sales territory is they find very particular customers, very particular clientele that fit certain criteria, and then pursue them. So instead of casting a wide net, and just going basically, it'd be the opposite of a door-to-door salesman or a cold calling. They find certain businesses and firms that they may be able to do business with that their larger competitors may not be as interested in, due to lack of volume, lack of sales, things of that nature. So being able to use her team of 2 to 3 people for the outside sales section, they're able to cover a lot of ground and actually do a decent amount of sales for their size and production capabilities. And this is due to the fact that they're very selective with their criteria for clientele. Something else I learned from her is Miss Caluette is very naturally good at connecting with people. I think this was a major advantage for her when she got into sales. She told me that she never planned on getting into sales, and after doing so, she just kind of found she had the natural knack for it. I think being able to listen well, which I gained from that interview, she, I would ask her questions, and then she would reply, and then I would make a statement. She'd let me, kind of talk it through, kind of give my side of the story. And she always was actively listening, which was, I think, a very important part of her sales technique and her responsibility as a manager, general manager and sales manager, being able to listen to not only her clients but her her team as well. If they, she knows what's going on in their lives. She knows who they are as people. It helps having a smaller team, getting to know them personally. But I think that's a major advantage that she has in the world of sales. Something else I learned was, though they have a very specific set of criteria for clientele, every once in a while they'll kind of reach out to some customers that you wouldn't necessarily expect to fit into their market share. So an example of this that I wrote about in the paper was a pine straw company. It's a I don't know exactly what the equivalent would be, but essentially it's a pine straw producer, and they collect pine straw and sell it. They own the land, the trees, and use that as their asset. But the coatings, they need coatings in order to preserve the pine straw and give it a certain aesthetic flair that customers are interested in. So even though when one thinks paint, one thinks industrial, one doesn't necessarily equate it to pine straw. One of their salespeople reached out, was just like, hey, just wanted to see if you needed anything from us. Turns out they were interested. They ended up producing them a very specific formula for their pine straw that helps essentially encapsulate it and preserve it without damaging the actual product itself. That was definitely an interesting story from her. One of the things that I did learn from her too was, though technology itself is crucial, the level of technology needs to be equated to the level of the firm. So because PCI only has 7 to 9 full-time employees with a sales staff of 2 to 3, they don't have a CRM that necessarily manages their clientele interactions for them. They tend to rely simply on email, Word documents, phone, text, things like that. I personally believe they could push that boundary a little bit more. Maybe invest in, Teams, Microsoft Teams, maybe establishing a Google Calendar, something that's very effective but being low cost. The CRMs themselves just don't make much sense for their team given their size and the amount of sales that they do. But it was interesting hearing her talk about the sort of low tech side of it. And the last thing is the need for compensation to align with the goals of the firms. So the structure that she's implemented is it tends to be a general salary with a lower commission, which doesn't make much sense at first. You would assume a larger commission would be kind of the goal, so you'd be able to recruit more salespeople. However, she's not necessarily looking for size of a sales team. She's not looking for volume when it comes to the sales team. She is looking for clienteles that will order consistently over the years. Because of PCI's size, they tend to not go for the larger fish. That tends to be scooped up by their competitors who are able to push out a lot more volume for a much lower cost on a routine basis. They do want customers, though, that will order consistently smaller batches, smaller production over many, many years. So they're looking for longevity instead of volume. And so because of this, the commission is much smaller. However, the commission stays with the customer and the salesperson. So if salesperson A, gets customer A interested in the product and is able to get them into the firm's market share and able to sell them on product, over the course of that life of that interaction of those sales, that salesperson will receive a commission. So because it's a smaller commission, they're not necessarily looking for larger sales. They're looking for longevity, and they're looking for a customer who's going to be interested in ordering their product over and over and over again, which adds up over the years. And that concludes my report.